The PS2 was a great era for video games. There was Resident Evil 4, Devil May Cry, and God of War. I personally didn't really play those games though, not having much of a choice being a kid and all. I just played what was available to me. But there was this one particular series of games I used to play the shit out of, the Naruto Ultimate Ninja series. I grew up watching the show, so I naturally got hooked on the games too. I would be sitting and playing these games all day long, either with my siblings or cousins. Well, that was of course if the half-broken PS2 we owned allowed it and didn't instantly give us a red screen. I love these games, so I thought it would be a fun idea to go back and replay them, just to see if they were as good as I remembered, and to also see how much actually changed between each title. So that's exactly what I did. I present to you the overview of all the 5 Ultimate Ninja games. But before that, I think it's important to mention that I played all of these games on the PC SX2 emulator, so they're going to look vastly different compared to their PS2 versions. With that out of the way, let's get into the actual games. Starting with Naruto Ultimate Ninja 1, the game that started it all. And because this was the first one in the series, I thought it would be very unpolished, but to my surprise, the game actually held a very strong spot in the series, and a lot of the core mechanics were kept in the later releases. It was actually very well done, especially when it came to the animations and character movesets. Like damn, some of these animations are crazy good, and I think a big reason for it is the stylistic choice. They modeled the game after the manga rather than the anime, which is noticeable if you look at the 2D background characters, the panel flips when shading the stages, and the shading that makes everything look so good. Going with this art style was definitely a smart choice, because this game's graphics weren't anything special for its time, so having this manga aesthetic definitely compensated for that. As for the content of the game, Naruto Ultimate Ninja 1 didn't really have a story mode. Instead, you had to play the arcade mode. You had the choice to pick any of the 12 characters, all having their own mini stories, and almost all of them took place at the Chunin exam, so most stories were pretty much, oh, I challenge you to a battle and yay, I beat you. These scenarios could sometimes get a little too goofy though. Like for example, if you play as Lee, he will encounter Sakura, who of course as usual rejects him, but his answer to that will be beating the ever-living shit out of her, which kind of results in her being rizzed up. Damn, maybe we should all be learning from the GOAT himself. Anyway, the only thing you can really do after the arcade mode is complete a pile of missions, each being ranked from B to S, and these missions are your standard, deal this amount of damage in total, or fight a certain amount of fights as this guy. And of course, I completed all of them from start to finish. After completing every single mission just like me, you may be asking yourself, what was the point of all this? Well, that is the only way to unlock the last 2 characters, being Naruto Kyuubi mode and Curse Mark Sasuke, but I just don't think it's worth it. Don't get me wrong, the characters are really cool, they have new movesets and ultimate jutsus too, but the amount of grinding you have to do to be able to use them is just way too much. They still have sick ultimates though, but I do think the developers went a little too ham with the flash effects, like every time you punch the enemy you get hit by a fucking flashbang. When it comes to the actual combat side of the game, you actually get quite a lot of options. You have the side, up, down, and neutral attacks, which were unchanged even later on. There is also aerial combat, where you can perform different attacks depending on the direction you choose. You also have ninja weapons you can use, which are mostly kunai, shuriken, big shuriken, and menu shuriken. You could get those items from the stage objects or from support characters that randomly appeared on the map. They could also sometimes give you an item which let you summon them, which basically let you perform a support attack. Every character also got 2 jutsus, one almost always being a projectile and the other one being a grab. I do wish there was more variety to the jutsus though, instead of it just being a projectile or a grab. They did try to be more creative with some characters like Neji, who had a counter instead of a projectile. More unique jutsus like that would definitely make the combat much better, but hey, they still look cool as hell. Aside from those, there were of course the ultimate jutsus, which was the #1 thing I was looking forward to when playing each one of these games. And like I said before, the ultimates did not disappoint. There wasn't just one ultimate jutsu though. No, every single character had 3 chakra modes, red, purple, and blue, each one giving you a jutsu with 2 to 3 unique animations, which meant that every character had up to 6 ultimate jutsus, which all looked very polished, but the absolute best ones are definitely Kakashi's and Sasuke's, and not because of the animation or anything like that, but because they gave you access to the Sharingan, which lets you copy every single jutsu in the game. Yes, all of them. And who cares if it doesn't make any sense lore-wise, it's still by far the most fun ability in the game. Overall, I think Ultimate Ninja 1 was much better than I expected. It was small, but still fun nonetheless. With that said, it was time to move on to the second game, Ultimate Ninja 2. This was such a huge upgrade from the first game. We finally got a proper story mode that included actual 3D models in dialogue, which is 10 times better than those shitty PNGs in the first game. They also introduced free roam, where you could explore Konoha and the Sand Village, progressing through the main story and doing side quests. We also got mini-games for the first time in the series, which made exploring the world even more fun. And on top of that, there was also an original story. Granted, the story was pretty ass, but hey, at least it was more content. The art direction for this game also changed a bit. This game wasn't as heavily inspired by the manga art style like the first one. Don't get me wrong, they still kept the manga style, but there was just less of it. They were probably going more for the anime look, which became more noticeable with the later games. Another big change was the character roster. This game let you play as 32 characters, which was 20 more than the first game. We finally got Itachi, Hiruzen, Jiraiya, and the goat himself. They even added Naruto in tights, which is definitely an odd choice, but a welcome one. Many of the old characters kept the same moveset, but a lot of them got new ultimate jutsus. Naruto got the Rasengan, Sasuke got his Curse Monk ultimate, and even characters like Kakashi got new, more advanced techniques. Some even got new jutsus that replaced the old, more clunky ones. The jutsus themselves got more creative too. Some ultimates could now buff your character up, some jutsus gave debuffs to the enemy, and so on. The movesets basically became more unique. It wasn't just raw damage like it was in the first Ultimate Ninja. Also, you could finally pick your support characters before the battle, so it wasn't up to chance anymore, and the number of support characters increased drastically, so there were a lot more new unique animations. With all these new characters, the roster became more fun, but it also got a bit too unbalanced. If you picked characters like Itachi or Kisame, you were almost always guaranteed to win. Like damn, they were so overpowered compared to a lot of other characters. And I guess it makes sense lore-wise, but it just became so noticeable how broken they were when you had to fight them in the story. Speaking of the story, it covered the events of Naruto starting from the tuning exam all the way up to the legendary Sannin fight. And like I said before, we actually got some new animations in the story, instead of these cursed PNGs. The story was nothing special though. You read the dialogue, fought, and progressed, the usual stuff. The difference was that there were winning conditions now, like beat the enemy with a level 3 ultimate or survive for this long, all while the boss was buffed up. This made the game harder and less repetitive than the first one. The more interesting part though was the ability to roam free in the village. You could interact with different shops and talk to random people, getting very interesting dialogues.
What?
Or you could do different side quests, which went mostly like, oh, get me this and I'll give you this. You know, the typical side missions. They were still fun nonetheless. But the absolute best thing about the free roam has to be the mini games. And sure, there weren't that many of them, but they were still really fun and definitely something that fits Naruto. My favorite one was definitely the one where you run up the tree competing against somebody. It really is a shame that there aren't mini games or similar stuff in the new Naruto games. Overall, the game was definitely a big improvement over the first one. I really like that they were going for something new like the free roam. It really did expand the game's options by a lot. After playing this game, I had really high hopes for the next one, Naruto Ultimate Ninja 3, and it did not disappoint. Do you remember when I said that Ultimate Ninja 2 was a huge step up from the first game? Well, take that and multiply it by 5 and you'll get Ultimate Ninja 3. Holy shit, were they cooking with this one. It improved on every single aspect of the previous games. We got a bigger character roster consisting of 42 characters, more stages, actual cutscenes, jutsu customization, bigger jutsu diversity, improved free roam, better missions, better side quests, new mini games, character transformations, and the ability to choose transformed characters before the fight. There was just so much packed into this game, which just blew the previous two games under the water. The biggest change was of course the story. It started from the very beginning and ended at the Naruto vs Sasuke fight. Every arc was now split into different chapters, so replaying and saving the game became much easier. The fights themselves weren't really anything different, you just had to fight and win with the conditions, but the presentation became much better. During crucial moments in the story, you would get these fire-ass cutscenes. Seriously though, they looked so good for a PS2 game. Also, the chapters themselves went by pretty fast. It took just a couple minutes to complete one, which I think was a good idea. Nothing felt dragged out. They just included the best and most important moments of each arc. After the main story, you could play through an original story, which was actually good this time. It was a battle royale, and no, not that kind. So now they basically held a competition in Konoha where you earned points by beating other ninjas, and in the end there would just be one person standing. The one that won could get any wish from the Hokage. Overall, I found this story actually enjoyable, especially the dialogue that could even be funny at times. The only problem I had with it was that you only played as Naruto. I think it would have been a perfect opportunity to test different characters from the roster. Otherwise, it was a good story that lasted a pretty long time. Also, free roam was a big part of it. That's how you progressed, by meeting and fighting the characters. Running around Konoha felt better than ever. They expanded on the map and also improved the parkour. Well, I say improved, but they basically just added it into this game because it was non-existent in the second one. Anyway, this gave you so much more freedom. You could climb on buildings, jump on them, go into different places, meet characters and complete quests. Also, there were new mini-games, which was definitely fun to see. The thing that received the biggest changes was probably the combat. This is the game that introduced jutsu clashes. This basically meant that if two characters performed specific jutsus on each other, they would clash, and the character that spammed the most would win. This didn't occur that often, but it was always nice to see. Also, this was the first Ultimate Ninja game to introduce proper transformations, either by doing an ultimate jutsu or by choosing it before the match. Overall, the combat just felt smoother, and all the characters felt faster. What made it even better though was the customization. You could now equip any character's jutsu to a different character, which led to very interesting moments. This is probably the goofiest Naruto game I've played so far. The customization didn't stop there either though. You could choose the jutsu and the ultimate jutsu for every single character, which made every character more fun to play as. Sasuke, for example, had 8 ultimates. Granted, a lot of them were taken from the previous 2 games, but it was still nice to have the option to build the character the way you wanted. This naturally also meant that the old chakra modes were removed now that they were divided into separate ultimates. As for the jutsus themselves, there were even more unique ones. It improved on what the second game was already doing by making the jutsus do more than just raw damage. Some ultimates could even cast a summoning jutsu now, which would function as a sort of boss fight, which felt nice but also very, and I mean very clunky. This was probably something experimental for the developers, but at least they made the characters more unique. Speaking of the characters, the roster was very interesting. Seeing characters like the 1st, 2nd and 4th Hokage was definitely surprising, because at the time the game was published we didn't really even know much about the characters, especially Minato, who didn't even have a voice actor at this time, which meant that he had no voice lines whatsoever. They just made him silent, which actually made him even cooler, to be honest. It was a really fun roster which included basically every single character I would want to play as. Ultimate Ninja 3 just did everything better. The characters, story, the music, variety and replayability. It made the biggest impression on me, which can't really be said for the next game, Ultimate Ninja 4. Now, this game wasn't as revolutionary as Ultimate Ninja 3. It didn't add much, but it did refine what was already there. This game shifted into Naruto Shippuden, which of course meant that we got new characters like Deidara, Sasori and so on. All of them were fun to play as, but the combat itself didn't really change much. Everything felt smoother, of course. You could also use 2 ultimate jutsus instead of just 1, and you had the ability to cancel enemies' ultimate if you completed certain amount of button prompts. And this was extremely easy to do against the bots you fought throughout the story, so enemy ultimate jutsus weren't even really a threat anymore. Also, the transformations felt better too, because you now had to be at low health to activate one, which just felt less cheesy and more strategic. The characters themselves became more unique too. Some characters could now taunt or use the chakra for other power-ups. This made the characters play differently from one another and also gave you more options in combat. Other than that, there isn't really much more that improved with the combat itself. The only thing that is objectively worse though is the character select screen. It's so bad in this game. How do we go from these stylish select screens to this abomination? Anyway, their biggest focus with this game became the RPG mode, which was its own original story. It's about the time Naruto was training with Jiraiya for 2 years, which I think is a brilliant idea, and a setting that should be utilized much more than it is. So in this original story, Naruto basically wants to rescue a girl that wanders into a dangerous cave so she can find a cure for her dying mom. The cure itself is protected by a demon or something, and Naruto decides to help her. That's pretty much the gist of it. Most of the time you'll be exploring this cave, and as you can see, they have added a new traversal and combat system. You can run around freely, perform different combo attacks, and use chakra to perform Rasengan and a lot of different combos. The combat itself was pretty much just spamming the attack button and using the chakra mode to extend the combos though. There wasn't really much depth to it. The same goes for the movement in this game. Sometimes you will have to parkour on these rocks to reach different areas and collect different items, and you also have the chakra jump, but otherwise the movement is just kind of bare bones too. Outside the cave, you can of course visit different areas and villages, completing side quests and finding items. The world in this game is is much bigger than Ultimate Ninja 3, which was good, but the problem is that they completely butchered the free roam. The freedom you had while jumping over buildings and climbing walls in the third one is not present here. It is very limited in Ultimate Ninja 4. There are very few buildings you can interact with the same way you did before, which just makes the traversal less fun. Also, they removed the minigames, which was a complete tragedy. Just imagine how creative they could have been, especially when the game is set in the Shippuden era. This whole RPG mode was just not that good. The new combat felt very repetitive. Same goes for the enemy types, which were just skinny shadows. The traversal felt worse in every way compared to the last game, and the story was alright, but the villain really didn't feel like someone who belonged in Naruto. I don't know why, maybe it was just too much fantasy. This whole new system felt like it was an experimental state. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad they were going for something new, and I hope that it would get better in Ultimate Ninja 5. It did not. Oh my god, did it become so much worse. But more about that later. After the RPG mode, you can complete the Shippuden story, which does retain the quality and plays around the same as the other story modes. The big problem though was its length. It was very short. You play from around when Naruto came back to the village with Jiraiya to the Kazekage rescue arc, but it doesn't even cover the whole arc. It just abruptly stops halfway through when they just start chasing after Gaara. The whole thing was just rushed and unfinished. Then there is also the memory mode, where they basically reused the story mode from Ultimate Ninja 3 but made it worse. You'll play different chapters of the season 1 story using these memory orbs that can be found during free roam. I just see no reason for this when you can play all this but better in the previous game, cause they do still cut out a large part of the story, and instead of maybe getting new cutscenes or something like that, you just get slideshows. As you can hear, I have very mixed opinions about the new content, but one thing I absolutely loved was the combat side of things. Like I said before, the quality increased, not only in the character moveset, but the special jutsu animations. They all looked so good. The best thing about the combat was just how fun all the characters were to play as. This being said, in Shippuden meant that we of course got new characters, but we also got the older versions of previous characters. The new versions were so much better. The absolute best one had to be Neji. This guy went from a slow and boring guy to a fucking beast. Like, god damn, were they cooking with this one. It's just sad that the RPG part of the game couldn't live up to the same quality. But look, in the end of the day, it was a good game. I just had higher hopes for it, especially after the third game. The combat side was really good, while the other part of the game like free roam and RPG combat were really lacking in quality. Anyway, after completing this game, it was time to move on to the next one, Naruto Ultimate Ninja 5. Okay, so I was pretty conflicted about this game. There is the combat side of the game, which is really good, and then there is the other part of the game, which can be so fucking miserable. Let's talk about the bad part first though. Do you remember how I criticized the free roam combat in Ultimate Ninja 4 for being too repetitive and boring? Well, this game took the initial concept and decided to shit all over it. Not only did the combat become much slower while being more restrictive, but this game also almost entirely removed the aerial combat that was in Ultimate Ninja 4. It's like they took the combat from that game, put it in slow motion, and removed the cooler things it had before. I wouldn't really have a bigger problem with this if you could actually play as different characters, which I thought would be the case judging by the fact that you can build your own team out of different characters and control said characters while roaming around. But no, you can't use them in fights, which then begs the question, what is the fucking purpose of this feature? It's just used to be able to pick the characters in the actual combat side of the game, but it is such a missed opportunity to be able to use them in master mode. They can only help you in combat, and you can use their jutsus too, which most often than not resulted in you just spamming them over and over. Also, you've probably noticed that you could now encounter the enemies anywhere in the world, which I remembered being fun as a kid, and god was I wrong. On the surface, this seems like a good idea, giving more variety to the world, to have some danger while you're exploring, and that would be the case if not for the abhorrent encounter rates. No, but for real, they were definitely smoking something while designing the enemy positions in this game. You couldn't step into a new area without having 50 guys standing and waiting to gangbang you. Every encounter also started with a loading screen, and you saw these very often. As fast as you were done with one fight, you would be caught off guard by another enemy, which meant a loading screen yet again. Once you were done with that and ran for a little bit, another enemy would catch up to you, which meant, yes, yet another loading screen. Exploring this world became extremely tedious due to this, which is a shame because the world in this game is huge, so there was a lot of places to visit, but I just couldn't be bothered visiting those places because of this system. I'm not joking when I say that this game had me tweaking every time I was caught by the enemy and I had to subject myself myself to this torture. Escaping the enemies helped, but sometimes there would just be too many to avoid. So I just resorted to buying a fuck ton of chakra replenishing potions and just spamming Rasengan and the other jutsus I had. Anyway, I really disliked the new combat, but what about the story itself? Well, it was good. It was basically Ultimate Ninja 4 story, but now with a completed Kazekage rescue arc, plus the Tenkaichi bridge arc, you had the quality you would expect from this series. Nothing much changed there. Although there was this one thing that dragged the story mode down quite a bit, and that was the filler. Sometimes in the story you would get these moments where the main plot would be put on hold, and instead you'd have to do some tedious shit that wasn't canon. Basically filler. The clearest example of this is when you're going to the Tenkaichi bridge to meet up with Kabuto, but you can't cross through the desert because you need the permit, so you run all the way back to the sand village to get it. And of course the one who can give you the permit isn't there, so instead a random merchant promises you one if you retrieve his package. So you run back to the desert again, fight off bandits that have way too much health, take the package and go back just to find out that you were scammed and you're not getting shit, so you have to fight even more bandits. Stuff like this was just tedious and probably made to drag out the playtime. Otherwise the story itself was done quite well, with the occasional cutscenes and the usual dialogue scenes one would expect. Also, after completing the main story you can play as Sasuke in his extra chapter, but I'm gonna be honest, I didn't come that far. I just couldn't be bothered, because you had to complete almost all the side quests to unlock it, which meant that you had to partake in this horrible combat system yet again. So because of this I can't really comment much on this story itself, but from what I've seen there isn't really much of a story here, to be honest. You can basically play as Sasuke, but the only thing you really do is complete different dungeons in Orochimaru's hideout, so there isn't much there either. Anyway, these things were the weakest aspects of this game. Where it really shines is in its gameplay. This is the best version of this combat that you can play. Well, it is basically the combat of the fourth one, but they added a few more characters, and this was also the first Naruto Ultimate Ninja game to introduce Team Ultimates, which are so good. As long as you choose two characters that will support it, you will be able to perform a Team Ultimate Jutsu. There are just a couple of them, but man are they so good. You have one with Sasori and Deidara where he coats the clay bomb with the black sand, another where Sakura uses Naruto as a weapon, and just in general they were very creative with them. And all of this just makes me wish that there were more of them. There are a couple of normal jutsus where teammates can participate too, which was nice. All the jutsus and ultimates in general were super well made here. A lot of them had this weight to them, this oomph that made them look so nice. Also, the new characters felt really good to play as, especially Sasuke in his slutty outfit. He was so OP and they gave him all the swagger he had in the beginning of Shippuden. Ultimate Ninja 5 was definitely hard to judge. As a kid, this was probably the game I played the most, but while replaying it, I just started to see the outdated game design more and more. So many aspects were frustrating in this game. They should have just built upon the combat of Ultimate Ninja 4 instead of making it a slower version of that. Other than that, this game has the highest quality in the series, especially when it comes to the animations. Replaying all these games was really fun, well, most of the time at least. You know, sometimes when you're scared to replay games or rewatch movies you liked as a child because you're afraid that they were actually bad and it's just the nostalgia talking. Well, I'm happy that wasn't the case here. All of these games were good, but if I had to rate them, I'd put Ultimate Ninja 1 the lowest, Ultimate Ninja 2 above, then Ultimate Ninja 5, Ultimate Ninja above that, and the absolute best game for me was Ultimate Ninja 3. It just made the biggest and best changes compared to all the other entries in this series. It also had the best way to handle the story mode in my opinion, where it removed all the fluff and left the best parts of the story. And on top of that, it had the best free roam with the best parkour and mini games. While games like Ultimate Ninja 4 and 5 were high in quality, I just enjoyed this one the most. And yeah, this is pretty much it. If you stayed to this point, feel free to subscribe and peace out.